and all the new synthetic drugs. So it's an incredible long list, and all of them are impairing. There aren't any drugs that aren't impairing.
Yeah, and also, you know, if you take the drugs legally, they're prescribed, they could interact with each other, and that's very important that we get the word out. How do you propose getting the word out besides the doctors, you know, telling the patients, look, you absolutely should not drive when you're under the influence, even though this legally prescribed. You know, for example, pain medication, what have you. Do you have any suggestions on that?
I think in addition to physicians, also pharmacists, I think one of the things that we would certainly recommend to safeguard against opioid impaired driving, particularly when we're talking about prescriptions used according to therapeutic doses, is to really make sure that at that point of contact where the patient is prescribed a new medication with impairing side effects, that both the physician and pharmacists are having a conversation with that patient that very clearly outlines that they should not be operating heavy machinery and that a vehicle constitutes heavy machinery. We're not just talking about crane operators.
That's right.
But I think sometimes that doesn't occur, and sometimes that fine print warning label is simply not sending a strong enough message.
I agree. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I think one of the things that's striking is that people often don't know they're impaired.
Yeah.
When people do know they're impaired, that's clearly a sign to say, if you feel impaired, if you feel high, don't drive. That's clear. The problem is that a lot of people feel just fine or even feel they're driving better when they're impaired, and I think that makes it very difficult to say you're going to educate them about it. I think the answer is really to not drive after you use drugs.
Exactly.
With respect to prescription drugs, I often prescribe myself medicines that are potentially impairing. When you start with a drug that is potentially impairing, you want to be very concerned with that with a patient. Once they're on a stable dose, usually it's not a problem. Unless they add something else to it.
Why, that's the thing, the mixture of alcohol and a drug, whether it's marijuana or what have you.
It can be very disturbing, but it becomes difficult to communicate that because the same drug, as I use in my methadone example, the same dose of the drug, which is non-impairing for a person who's used to it, is very impairing to a person who isn't. And that makes it difficult to draw these bright lines that people want to have.
Yeah. I know. We got to get the message out, but you're right. Everybody's different. So earlier this year, there was an article in our local newspaper in Pasco County, Florida, the Laker Lutz News, that shared a tragic story of a constituent, a couple whose daughter and family were sadly killed by a drug-impaired driver. I'd like to insert that the article be in the record, Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chair, please. I'd like to insert that into the record.
So without objection.
Thank you. These parents have since become strong advocates for raising awareness and education about drug driving, and I've personally met with them and heard their heartbreaking stories. It highlights the urgency that we have today to address this issue and reverse the trends we've been seeing over the past few years.